Hello, friend. Welcome back to another quiet journey through the science of rest and wonder. Some evenings, the mind feels heavier than it should. You sit at your desk as the afternoon light fades to amber, and suddenly your thoughts drift sideways. A memory from childhood, a worry about tomorrow, the lyrics to a song you haven't heard in years. Your eyes grow soft, your focus frays like old rope. And you wonder why, when I'm this tired, can't I just stop thinking? It's a strange paradox, isn't it? The more exhausted we become, the less control we have over where our minds wander. Fatigue doesn't quiet the brain, it unlocks it. And tonight, we're going to drift softly through the hidden science of why thoughts begin to scatter when the brain grows weary. Why exhaustion doesn't bring silence, but a kind of gentle chaos. Why the tired mind travels everywhere and nowhere at once. Before we begin, if you find comfort in these quiet explorations, you might like to stay a while. You can gently tap the like button, subscribe if you'd like more stories, told softly, and ring the little bell not for noise, but so the next quiet night can find you again. Now, let's drift. Tonight's question lives in a place we all know, but rarely examine. That threshold hour when afternoon bleeds into evening, when you've been awake too long and the world starts to feel slightly unreal. Scientists call this mental fatigue. Poets call it the twilight of consciousness. But what's actually happening inside your skull when weariness takes hold? The human brain, the 3-pound universe folded inside bone, consumes about 20% of your body's energy, despite being only 2% of your weight. It's a hungry organ, ravenous even. Every thought, every calculation, every moment of attention burns through glucose and oxygen like a slow fire. And like any fire, it needs fuel to keep burning bright. Imagine your brain as a city at night. When you're well rested, the city hums with organized light. Traffic flows smoothly. Street lamps guide the way. The power grid holds steady. But as the hours accumulate, as you push through meeting after meeting, task after task, the power supply begins to waver. Lights flicker. Some streets go dark while others blaze too bright. The traffic signals stop coordinating. And in that growing disorder, something curious happens. Your thoughts stop following the roads. They drift through alleys and shortcuts you didn't know existed. This isn't weakness. This isn't your brain failing you. This is your brain trying to tell you something ancient and true. Rest is not optional. It's written into the architecture of consciousness itself. Research from the early 2000s, led by neuroscientist Marcus Rachel at Washington University, revealed something remarkable about how our brains behave when we're not actively focused on a task. He discovered what's now called the default mode network, a constellation of brain regions that light up precisely when we stop concentrating, when we daydream, when we remember, when we let our minds wander without direction. Here's what's fascinating when you're fresh and alert. Your prefrontal cortex. The brain's executive control center acts like a disciplined conductor. It decides which thoughts get attention and which get dismissed. It keeps you on task. It filters the noise. But as fatigue sets in, this conductor grows tired. Its grip loosens. And the default mode network, which has been waiting patiently in the background, begins to take over. Think of it this way. Your focused mind is like holding a flashlight steady on a single point. But when exhaustion comes, your hand trembles. The beam starts to swing, and suddenly you're noticing shadows you hadn't seen before. Corners of the room you'd forgotten existed. The light doesn't go out, it just stops obeying you. Studies using functional MRI scans have shown that when people are sleep-deprived or mentally exhausted, the default mode network doesn't just activate. It becomes hyperactive. It starts firing in patterns that would normally be suppressed. Your brain isn't shutting down. It's letting go of the reins. And here's the strange beauty of it. Some of humanity's most creative insights have emerged from this state of controlled drift. Artists, writers, scientists throughout history have spoken of their best ideas arriving not during intense focus, but in those liminal moments when the mind wanders freely, when fatigue loosens the grip of logic just enough for unexpected connections to spark. But there's a shadow side to this liberation. Because when the tired brain drifts, it doesn't always drift toward pleasant shores. Sometimes it circles back to worries, to regrets, to anxious projections about the future. The same loosening that allows creativity also permits rumination. The same freedom that brings insight can bring spiral thoughts that loop and tighten. Have you noticed how problems feel larger late at night? How a simple worry at 10 p.m. becomes an existential crisis by 2 a.m.? That's not your imagination. That's neurochemistry. When your brain is tired, the systems that regulate emotional response begin to falter alongside the systems that regulate attention. You're not just losing focus, you're losing perspective. Scientists suggest this is partly because fatigue affects different brain regions at different rates. The prefrontal cortex, that rational conductor we mentioned, is one of the first to show signs of wear. But the amygdala, your brain's emotional alarm system, stays active longer. So as the evening deepens and exhaustion accumulates, you end up with a hypervigilant emotional center and a weakened rational filter. It's like having a smoke detector that's overly sensitive and a firefighter who's half asleep. Some researchers believe this imbalance served an evolutionary purpose. Our ancestors needed to stay alert to threats even when tired. An exhausted hunter-gatherer still needed to notice the rustle in the grass that might signal danger. So, the brain developed a system where emotional vigilance could outlast cognitive clarity. In the modern world, where the rustle in the grass has been replaced by the email you forgot to send, or the conversation you wish you'd handle differently, this system can feel less like protection and more like punishment. But understanding this pattern offers a kind of gentle power. When you recognize that your spiraling thoughts at midnight aren't revealing deep truths, but rather the predictable behavior of a tired brain, you can hold them more lightly. You can say to yourself, this is chemistry, not prophecy. This is fatigue, not reality. The question beneath the question is this: why does the brain allow this drift at all? Why not simply shut down cleanly like a computer entering sleep mode? Why the strange in-between state where thoughts scatter like startled birds? The answer, it seems, lies in how human consciousness evolved. We're not machines with on-off switches. We're biological systems with rhythms and gradients. Sleep doesn't arrive like a guillotine. It approaches like a tide, gradual and insistent. And in that approaching tide, the brain begins to shift its priorities. It starts to care less about the external world and more about the internal one. Less about what you need to do and more about what you've done, what you remember, what you feel. This shift serves the crucial work of memory consolidation, emotional processing, and neural maintenance that happens during sleep. The drift isn't a bug in the system. It's the opening movement of the brain's nightly symphony. The wandering thoughts are the warm-up exercises before the main performance of dreams. So, when you sit in that fading afternoon light, feeling your mind slip sideways into daydream and distraction, you're not losing control. You're watching one of nature's most elegant transitions, the conscious mind softening its borders, the rigid structures of wakefulness beginning to blur and breathe. Ancient wisdom traditions understood this without neuroscience. Meditation practices, contemplative prayer, the deliberate cultivation of stillness, all these were ways of working with the mind's natural tendency to drift rather than against it. They recognized that sometimes the path to clarity runs through surrender, not effort. The tired brain teaches us something the fresh brain often forgets. Control is temporary. Focus is a flame that cannot burn forever. And there's a kind of wisdom that only arrives when we stop trying so hard to direct every thought, when we let the mind show us where it wants to go. But we're just beginning to understand the mechanisms beneath this mystery. The chemistry of fatigue runs deeper than simple tiredness. There are molecules accumulating in your brain right now, with each passing hour of wakefulness, that are literally changing how your neurons communicate. There are electrical patterns, shifting networks, reorganizing a whole invisible architecture of exhaustion being built synapse by synapse. And as we'll discover, this architecture doesn't just make you tired, it transforms the very texture of consciousness itself, pulling you slowly, inevitably toward the strange frontier between waking and sleep. The structure beneath this, drift the actual machinery that allows your thoughts to slip sideways when exhaustion sets in, lives in a conversation between two vast networks inside your skull. One network grips, the other releases, and the dance between them determines whether you stay anchored to the present moment or float away into memory, imagination, and dream. Neuroscientists call the gripping network the task-positive network. It's centered largely in your prefrontal cortex, that wrinkled ribbon of tissue sitting just behind your forehead. This is your brain's CEO, its strategic planner, its quality control department. When you're reading these words right now, following the thread of meaning from sentence to sentence, it's your task. Positive network doing the heavy lifting. It's the part of you that stays on target, that filters distraction, that says, focus here, not there. But there's another network equally vast, equally sophisticated, that activates precisely when the task-positive network relaxes. Marcus Raschel, a neuroscientist at Washington University School of Medicine, discovered this in 2001, quite by accident. He was studying brain activity during cognitive tasks using PET scans and later fMRI to watch which regions lit up when people solved problems or memorized lists. But he noticed something odd in the baseline scans, the images taken when participants were supposedly doing nothing, just resting between tasks. Certain brain regions weren't resting at all. They were blazing with activity, reliably, consistently, almost defiantly active when people stopped trying to concentrate. Raschel called this the default mode network, because it seemed to be the brain's default state, the mode it returned to whenever external demands lifted. It included the medial prefrontal cortex, the posterior cingulate cortex, parts of the parietal lobe, and the hippocampus, a whole constellation of regions that seemed to form a circuit dedicated to internal mentation, to the mind's private weather. Here's what makes this discovery so profound. For understanding mental fatigue, these two networks task, positive and default mode, operate like a neurological seesaw. When one rises, the other tends to fall. When you're deeply focused on a challenging task, your default mode network quiets down. When you stop concentrating, when you let your mind wander, the default mode surges back to life, and the task, positive network, dims. In a well-rested brain, this seesaw tips smoothly and predictably. You can focus when you need to focus. You can daydream when you choose to daydream. The transitions feel natural, controlled. But fatigue disrupts this elegant balance. Research shows that mental exhaustion doesn't simply weaken both networks equally. It specifically undermines the prefrontal cortex's ability to suppress the default mode network. It's like the CEO slowly losing authority over a restless workforce. Studies conducted at the University of California, Berkeley, by Matthew Walker's sleep lab demonstrated this beautifully. When participants were kept awake for extended periods, brain scans revealed that their default mode networks became hyperactive and poorly regulated. The network fired erratically, intruding into moments when focus was supposed to reign. Thoughts wandered, not because people chose to let them wander, but because the neural brakes had worn thin. Imagine conducting an orchestra. When you're fresh, your baton commands immediate response. The violins follow your tempo. The horns respect your dynamics. But as the rehearsal stretches into hour 5, 6, 7, the musicians start to improvise. A cellist drifts into a melody from another piece. The percussion section loses the beat. You still hold the baton, but it commands less and less obedience. That's your prefrontal cortex at the end of a long day, still present, still trying, but no longer able to enforce discipline. This isn't failure, this is biology. the prefrontal cortex is evolutionarily young, metabolically expensive, and remarkably sensitive to depletion. It's the first region to show impairment when glucose drops, when sleep is restricted, when stress hormones flood the system. Older, deeper brain structures, the ones governing emotion, habit, and survival, these are hardier. They can keep functioning under duress. But that sophisticated executive control, that uniquely human capacity for sustained voluntary attention, it's fragile. Beautiful, powerful, and fragile. What happens in the space that fragility creates? Your default mode network doesn't just activate randomly. It has specific patterns, specific habits of thought it tends to generate. Neuroscientist Jonathan Smallwood, whose research spans institutions from York to Edinburgh to Queen's University, has spent years mapping what the mind does when it wanders. And what he's found is that the default mode network seems particularly drawn to three kinds of mental content memories, especially emotional or self-relevant ones, simulations of possible futures and reflections on oneself and others. When your tired brain releases its grip on the present moment, it tends to drift backward into the past or forward into imagined tomorrows. You're sitting at your desk trying to finish a report, but suddenly you're remembering an argument from last week, or rehearsing a conversation that hasn't happened yet, or wondering what a friend meant by that odd comment earlier. The default mode network is running simulations, playing out scenarios, searching for meaning and connection in the vast archive of your lived experience. Some researchers believe this wandering serves an important function. It allows the brain to process emotional experiences, to consolidate memories, to plan for future challenges, without the constraints of immediate perception. It's maintenance work, psychological housekeeping, that can't always happen while you're fully engaged with the external world. But when fatigue removes the regulatory control too completely, this useful wandering can become problematic rumination. The mind doesn't just visit the past, it gets stuck there. It doesn't just imagine the future, it catastrophizes about it. There's a darker pattern that emerges in the fatigued brain's default mode activity. Studies have shown that when people are sleep-deprived or mentally exhausted, their default mode networks tend to generate more negative, more self-critical, more anxious thoughts. The tired mind doesn't wander randomly. It wanders downward. It finds the worries, the regrets, the unresolved tensions, and circles them like a moth around flame. Why would the brain do this? Some scientists suggest it's a mismatch between our modern environment and our evolutionary past. In ancestral contexts, fatigue often signaled genuine danger. You'd been awake too long because you were lost or hungry or fleeing predators. A bias toward anxious, vigilant thinking made sense. Better to be worried and survive than relaxed and eaten. But in a world where fatigue comes from back-to-back Zoom meetings and endless emails, this ancient warning system misfires. Your brain treats your exhaustion as an emergency, even when you're perfectly safe in your living room. The architecture reveals itself most clearly in the timing of these shifts. Researchers using real-time fMRI can now watch the moment-by-moment fluctuations between focused attention and mind wandering. What they see is fascinating. Even when you're trying to concentrate on a task, your default mode network periodically tries to activate. It sends up little bursts of activity like a child tugging on a parent's sleeve. Usually, if you're well rested, your prefrontal cortex notices and gently suppresses these bursts. The wandering impulse is caught before it fully blooms into conscious distraction. But as you grow tired, the suppression weakens. Those little bursts of default mode activity start breaking through. You're reading a page and suddenly realize you haven't absorbed the last 3 paragraphs. You're in a conversation and notice your attention has drifted to something completely unrelated. These aren't moments of choice. These are moments when one network briefly overpowers another, when the seesaw tips without your permission. Have you ever driven home from work and arrived without remembering the journey? That's the default mode network taking over a well-practiced task. allowing your conscious attention to wander while deeper automatic systems handle the navigation. It's efficient when the task is routine and the route is familiar. It's dangerous when the task requires active monitoring and the environment is unpredictable. The National Highway Traffic Safety Administration has documented thousands of accidents attributed to drowsy driving, and brain imaging studies explain why fatigued drivers show erratic switching between task-positive and default mode networks. They're not simply slow or clumsy. They're flickering in and out of attention itself, present one moment and gone the next. The road is there, then it isn't. Consciousness becomes intermittent. This flickering happens in smaller ways throughout your tired day. You're typing an email and suddenly you've written the wrong word, not because you don't know the right one, but because your fingers continued on autopilot while your conscious attention visited somewhere else. You're cooking and you forget you put something on the stove. You're talking to someone and you realize you've lost the thread of what they're saying mid-sentence. These aren't signs of permanent damage. These are signs of a network struggling to maintain coherence under depletion. The poet John Ashbery once wrote that attention is like a swaying lantern in a hand that's trying to stay steady. When you're tired, the hand trembles. The light swings wide. Shadows that were hidden suddenly loom large. And the path ahead, which seems so clear in daylight, becomes uncertain, dreamlike, strange. But there's a deeper chemistry underneath this neural architecture, a molecular tide that's been rising in your brain since the moment you woke up this morning. It's a substance so simple, so ubiquitous, that for decades, scientists overlooked its role in consciousness itself. And yet, this molecule, this quiet accumulation happening in the spaces between your neurons, may be the single most important factor in why the tired brain begins to drift, why focus frays, why the boundary between waking and sleeping starts to blur as the day grows long. That molecule has a name: adenosine. 4 syllables that contain the gradual dimming of every waking hour. Right now, as you listen to these words, adenosine is accumulating in the fluid spaces between your neurons, molecule by molecule, like snow gathering on branches. And with each passing minute of consciousness, the weight of that snow grows heavier. Adenosine is a byproduct, a metabolic exhaust that your brain produces simply by being awake and active. Every time a neuron fires, every time a thought sparks across a synapse, your cells burn. Adenosine triphosphate, ATP, the universal energy currency of life. And when ATP breaks down to release its energy, and one of the fragments left behind is adenosine itself, free-floating, waiting. The discovery of adenosine's role in sleep regulation unfolded slowly across the 20th century, but the crucial breakthrough came in the 1980s and 90s through the work of researchers like Robert McCarley at Harvard and Thomas Porkka-Heiskanen in Finland. They found that adenosine doesn't just accumulate passively. It actively binds to specific receptors on neurons throughout your brain, particularly in a region called the basal forebrain, which plays a critical role in maintaining wakefulness and attention. When adenosine molecules lock onto these receptors, they do something elegant and inexorable. They slow things down. They reduce the rate at which neurons fire. They dampen the excitatory signals that keep your brain alert and responsive. It's like someone gradually turning down the voltage in an electrical system. The lights don't go out all at once. They dim, flicker, soften into twilight. The longer you stay awake, the more adenosine builds up, and the stronger this dampening effect becomes. After 16 hours of wakefulness, your brain is swimming in adenosine. After 18, 20, 24 hours, the concentration reaches levels that profoundly impair cognitive function. Studies have shown that staying awake for 17 hours straight produces cognitive impairment, equivalent to having a blood alcohol level of 0.05%. Push it to 24 hours, and you're functioning like someone legally drunk in most countries. But here's what makes adenosine so fascinating. In the context of wandering thoughts, it doesn't affect all parts of your brain equally. The prefrontal cortex, that executive control center we discussed earlier, is exquisitely sensitive to adenosine. Even modest increases start to degrade its performance. Meanwhile, older, deeper brain structures, the limbic system governing emotion, the brainstem managing basic arousal, these regions are more resistant. They can keep chugging along even when adenosine levels climb high. This creates an asymmetry, a cognitive imbalance. Your ability to focus, plan, inhibit impulses, and regulate attention, all prefrontal functions, degrades faster than your ability to feel, react, remember, and generate spontaneous thought. You end up in a peculiar state where you're alert enough to think, but too impaired to direct what you think about. The generator is running, but the steering wheel has gone slack. There's a reason coffee works. Caffeine, that beloved molecule consumed in billions of cups every day, is a near-perfect mimic of adenosine's molecular shape. It fits into adenosine receptors like a key in a lock. But unlike adenosine, it doesn't turn the lock, it just blocks it. Caffeine doesn't give you energy. It prevents adenosine from telling your brain how tired you actually are. It's a masquerade, a chemical disguise that can sustain alertness for a few hours, while adenosine continues accumulating in the background, waiting for the caffeine to clear, so it can finally deliver its message: rest now. Scientists have measured this with elegant precision. In studies where participants consume caffeine and then have their adenosine levels measured, the molecule is still there, still building up, but its effects are temporarily suspended. The moment the caffeine metabolizes and leaves those receptors unguarded, the accumulated adenosine floods in all at once. That's why the coffee crash feels so sudden, so complete. It's not new fatigue arriving, it's old fatigue that's been waiting backstage suddenly stepping into the light. But even without caffeine's interference, the adenosine system reveals something profound about the nature of consciousness. Wakefulness isn't a state you simply inhabit. It's a state you must actively maintain against a rising chemical tide. From the moment you open your eyes each morning, your brain is fighting a slow-motion battle against its own metabolic byproducts. Attention is an achievement, not a given. And the longer you sustain it, the more effort it requires. Research by Chiara Sorelli and Giulio Tononi at the University of Wisconsin-Madison has shown that different cognitive tasks produce adenosine at different rates. Complex mental work, the kind that demands sustained focus and working memory, generates adenosine faster than passive activities. An hour of intense problem solving leaves you more adenosine-laden than an hour of watching television. The brain's fatigue is proportional to its labor. This explains something you've probably noticed: why the last hour of a long workday feels so much harder than the first. It's not just that you've depleted your motivation or willpower, though those play a role. It's that your neurons are literally bathed in higher concentrations of a molecule that makes firing more difficult, makes sustaining attention more costly, makes every cognitive task feel like wading through thickening fog. And there's another player in this chemical story, another neurotransmitter whose levels shift as adenosine rises: dopamine. Dopamine is often called the motivation molecule, though that's a simplification. More precisely, dopamine signals salience, importance, the promise of reward. It's what makes you want to pursue goals, what gives activities their sense of purpose and pleasure. And research shows that prolonged wakefulness, that steady climb of adenosine, suppresses dopamine signaling in key brain circuits. When dopamine dips, tasks that normally feel engaging start to feel pointless. Goals that motivated you in the morning seem irrelevant by evening. It's not that you've changed your values or lost your ambition. It's that the neurochemical system that attaches feeling to doing has been dampened. The tired brain doesn't just struggle to focus, it struggles to care what it focuses on. At the same time, another neurotransmitter called GABA, which inhibits neural activity, begins to rise under the influence of accumulated adenosine. GABA is the brain's brake pedal, the chemical that quiets overactive circuits and promotes a general state of neural calm. In moderate amounts, it's helpful, even necessary. It prevents runaway excitation, keeps the brain from overheating. But as GABA levels climb in the fatigued brain, they contribute to that growing sense of mental sluggishness, that feeling that thoughts are moving through molasses. Think of your brain at the end of a long day as a city at dusk where someone has started dimming the streetlights, slowing the traffic signals, and turning down the background music in every shop. The city still functions, people still move through it, but everything happens at a softer volume, a slower pace. And in that dimming, that slowing, certain kinds of activity become difficult, while others become almost inevitable. Focused, goal-directed thought, the kind that requires high dopamine and low GABA, becomes nearly impossible. But associative thinking, the kind where one idea leads to another without logical constraint, where memories bubble up unbidden and fantasies unfold without effort. This kind of thinking thrives in the neurochemical environment of fatigue. The default mode network we discussed earlier isn't just released by a weakened prefrontal cortex. It's also actively encouraged by a brain chemistry that favors loose associations over tight control. There's a poetic irony here. The same adenosine that makes focused work so difficult also creates the conditions for a different kind of mental richness. When your executive functions are dampened, when dopamine drops and GABA rises, your mind becomes more open to unexpected connections, more sensitive to subtle patterns, more willing to follow thought trails that logic would normally dismiss as irrelevant. Some of history's great insights have emerged from this state. Auguste Kekule, the chemist who discovered the ring structure of benzene, famously reported that the solution came to him in a daydream by the fire exhausted after a long day of failed experiments. His tired mind, freed from rigid analytical thinking, allowed him to envision the snake eating its own tail, the symbol that became the hexagonal structure that had eluded him for months. Fatigue didn't give him the answer, but it removed the cognitive rigidity that had been obscuring it. But this is a double-edged gift. The same loosening that permits creative insight also permits destructive rumination. The same reduction in executive control that allows unexpected connections also allows anxious loops, catastrophic thinking, emotional spirals. And unlike Kekule dozing peacefully by his fire, most of us experience late-day fatigue, not in quiet contemplation, but in the midst of demands that still require sharp attention. We're exhausted and expected to perform adenosine-soaked and still answering emails chemically impaired, but operating machinery, driving cars, making decisions that matter. The mismatch is dangerous. Traffic accident rates spike in the late afternoon and evening hours, correlating almost perfectly with when adenosine levels peak before sleep. Medical errors increase during night shifts, and at the end of long rotations when doctors and nurses are pushing through adenosine-induced cognitive fog. The National Transportation Safety Board has linked multiple major disasters, including the Exxon Valdez oil spill and the Chernobyl nuclear accident, to operator fatigue and the impaired judgment it brings. These aren't cases of people being careless or lazy. These are cases of brains operating under neurochemical conditions that make reliable performance neurologically impossible. Adenosine doesn't care about deadlines, responsibilities, or consequences. It accumulates according to the laws of biochemistry, indifferent to human urgency. And yet, we persist in treating fatigue as a matter of willpower, as though trying harder could override the molecular reality of an exhausted brain. How many times have you told yourself to just push through, to focus up, to get it done? How often do you feel guilty when your attention drifts, as if the wandering were a moral failing rather than a chemical inevitability? The science suggests we need a different relationship with tiredness, not as an enemy to be conquered through caffeine and determination, but as information to be respected. When your thoughts start to scatter, when focus becomes effortful, when the world takes on that slightly unreal quality, those aren't signs of weakness. Those are your neurons heavy with adenosine telling you a truth your schedule might not want to hear. This body needs rest, But the story of fatigue doesn't end with chemistry alone, because there's another dimension to exhaustion, a stranger and more liminal territory that opens up when adenosine rises high enough and consciousness begins its slow negotiation with sleep. It's a threshold state, a border zone that artists and mystics have long recognized as a place where the rules of ordinary awareness start to bend and shimmer, where the line between waking thought and sleeping dream becomes beautifully dangerously thin. This border territory has a name that sounds like something from a dream itself, hypnagogia, from the Greek words hypnos, meaning sleep, and agogos, meaning leading toward. The state of being led into sleep. It's that strange elastic moment when you're no longer quite awake, but not yet quite asleep, when the rules governing conscious thought begin to dissolve like watercolors in rain. You know this state even if you've never named it. It's the flicker of impossible images that flash across your inner vision as you drift off. The sudden sensation of falling that jolts you back to alertness. The voice that speaks a sentence that makes perfect sense in the moment, but dissolves into nonsense the instant you try to hold on to it. The feeling that you're thinking thoughts that don't quite belong to you, as if someone else's mind has briefly merged with yours. Scientists have studied hypnagogia for over a century, drawn to its peculiar phenomenology, the way it seems to occupy a space between categories. In the late 1800s, Alfred Maury, a French scholar, documented his own hypnagogic experiences in meticulous detail, describing vivid hallucinations, sudden jerks of the body, and thoughts that moved with a logic entirely their own. He called these experiences illusions hypnagogiques and recognized them as a distinct phase of consciousness, neither waking nor sleeping, but something stranger and more liminal. What happens in your brain during this twilight crossing? The electrical signature tells part of the story. When you're fully awake and alert, your brain produces fast, low-amplitude beta waves, the crackling frequency of focused attention. As fatigue sets in and you begin to relax, these shift to alpha waves, slower and more rhythmic, the frequency of calm wakefulness. But as you tip into hypnagogia, alpha gives way to theta, slower still, the dreamy wavelength that characterizes the earliest stage of sleep. The fascinating part is that during hypnagogia, these different frequencies don't switch cleanly like radio stations. They overlap, compete, flicker back and forth. EEG recordings show that the hypnagogic brain is electrically unstable, oscillating between waking and sleeping patterns, sometimes several times per second. You're toggling between states of consciousness so rapidly that neither state fully establishes itself. The result is a kind of cognitive shimmer, a mind that can't decide what it is. This instability creates the conditions for something remarkable, a breakdown in the usual boundaries of thought. During normal waking consciousness, your prefrontal cortex acts as a reality filter. It evaluates incoming information against stored knowledge and dismisses what doesn't make sense. A purple elephant floating through your living room. Your prefrontal cortex immediately tags this as internally generated, not real, ignorable. But in hypnagogia, as that prefrontal oversight weakens, the filter fails. Internal imagery gets mistaken for external perception. Thoughts take on the vividness and apparent reality of sensory experiences. Thomas Edison, the inventor, whose name is synonymous with the light bulb, allegedly used hypnagogia as a tool for creative problem solving. The story, perhaps apocryphal but widely repeated, is that Edison would sit in a chair holding steel ball bearings in his hands suspended over metal pie pans. As he drifted into the hypnagogic state, his muscles would relax. The ball bearings would drop and clang against the pans, jarring him awake. In those brief moments between the clang and full alertness, Edison claimed to harvest ideas that eluded his conscious mind. Salvador Dali, the surrealist painter, reportedly used a nearly identical technique, holding a key over a metal plate and allowing himself to slip into hypnagogia, then waking at the moment of dropping the key to capture the bizarre imagery that arose in that in-between state. He called it slumber with a key and some of his most iconic dreamlike paintings are said to have originated in these brief voyages to the threshold of sleep. Whether these specific stories are true matters less than what they reveal. Creative minds across history have recognized hypnagogia as a state where imagination operates under different rules, where the mind makes connections it wouldn't otherwise make, where the impossible briefly feels plausible. Modern neuroscience suggests they were onto something. The weakening of prefrontal control combined with the activation of sensory and memory networks creates a kind of cognitive Wild West, where ideas collide without the usual constraints of logic or relevance. But hypnagogia isn't always pleasant or productive. For many people, this twilight state brings anxiety rather than inspiration. The same dissolution of boundaries that permits creative insight also permits intrusive thoughts, disturbing images, and the sensation of presences in the room. Sleep paralysis, a phenomenon where you wake up unable to move while still experiencing dreamlike hallucinations, is essentially hypnagogia, occurring in reverse during the transition from sleep to waking, rather than waking to sleep. The hallucinations of hypnagogia can be astonishingly vivid. People report seeing faces, geometric patterns, landscapes, writing in unknown languages, all appearing with the clarity of real perception. Some hear voices, music, or sounds that aren't there. Others experience bodily sensations, the feeling of floating, spinning, or being touched. These aren't signs of pathology. They're signs of a sensory cortex that's begun to generate its own content in the absence of strong external input, combined with a weakened prefrontal cortex that can't properly label this content as internally generated. Research by Valdes Noriega and colleagues has shown that hypnagogic experiences follow predictable patterns. Simple visual hallucinations, spots of light or color, tend to appear first. Then more complex imagery emerges, faces, objects, scenes. Auditory hallucinations often take the form of hearing one's name called or hearing fragments of conversation. And there's frequently a sense of bizarreness, an awareness that what you're experiencing is strange even while you're experiencing it. Have you ever had that moment where you're lying in bed almost asleep and you suddenly feel like you're falling? That's called a hypnic jerk or sleep start, and it occurs in up to 70% of people. Scientists believe it happens when your motor cortex fires spontaneously as control systems are transitioning from waking to sleeping. Your muscles twitch involuntarily, your mind interprets the sensation as falling, and the combination jolts you back toward wakefulness. It's your brain briefly losing coherent command over your body, a glitch in the handoff between conscious and unconscious control. The philosopher and psychologist William James wrote about hypnagogia in his Principles of Psychology, noting that in this state, the ordinary stream of thought becomes something wilder and less predictable. Ideas arise that conscious reasoning would immediately reject. Images appear that seem to come from outside the self, and time itself becomes elastic, a few seconds of clock time, containing what feels like minutes of subjective experience. Modern studies using functional MRI have revealed that during hypnagogia, the brain's visual cortex becomes active even though the eyes are closed and no visual information is entering. It's as if the visual system, deprived of external input, begins to run on its own, generating patterns and images from memory and imagination. At the same time, the thalamus, which normally acts as a gatekeeper, regulating what sensory information reaches conscious awareness, begins to loosen its criteria. More signals get through, and the brain has increasing difficulty distinguishing which signals came from the outside world and which it generated internally. This blurring extends to the sense of self. During hypnagogia, people often report out-of-body experiences, the sensation of floating above their physical form, or occupying two positions simultaneously. The parietal cortex, which normally maintains your sense of where your body is in space, starts to receive conflicting information as sensory input fades and internally generated signals increase. The result can be a profound confusion about the boundaries of the self, a feeling that you've expanded beyond your skin, or that your body isn't quite where it should be. There's a vulnerability in this state that ancient cultures recognized even without understanding the neuroscience. Many traditions include practices or warnings about the threshold of sleep, treating it as a spiritually significant or potentially dangerous time. Some see it as a moment when the soul loosens from the body. Others view it as a time when the mind is open to messages from beyond. From a neuroscientific perspective, what they were recognizing is the genuine permeability of consciousness in hypnagogia, the way the normal filters and boundaries become porous. But there's another phenomenon that occurs in the fatigued brain, one that's even more common and potentially more dangerous than hypnagogia, microsleeps. These are brief episodes lasting anywhere from a fraction of a second to 30 seconds, where your brain essentially shuts down for emergency maintenance. You're not choosing to sleep. Your brain is taking sleep from you, seizing moments of unconsciousness without asking permission. Microsleeps look strange from the outside. Someone experiencing them might have their eyes open, might appear to be staring straight ahead, but they're not processing what they're seeing. Their brain has temporarily gone offline. Then just as suddenly they're back, often with no awareness that anything happened. They might blink shift position and continue as if there had been no interruption. But there was. Consciousness flickered off and on like a faulty bulb. The danger becomes obvious when you consider that microsleeps can happen during any activity, including driving. Studies of drowsy driving have documented cases where people experience microsleeps, while behind the wheel, their vehicles drifting across lanes or failing to brake for obstacles directly in front of them. Their eyes were open, the road was visible, but the brain wasn't home. For those few seconds, no one was driving. Researchers can induce microsleeps reliably in laboratory settings by keeping participants awake for extended periods and then asking them to perform boring, repetitive tasks. Brain imaging shows that during these microsleeps, activity in the prefrontal cortex and other regions critical for attention and awareness essentially flatlines. The thalamus, which needs to stay active to maintain consciousness, goes quiet. It's not sleep in the full sense. There's no progression through sleep stages, no REM, no dreams. It's just the brain pulling an emergency brake, forcing a moment of rest, because it can no longer sustain wakefulness. The subjective experience of microsleeps is often one of lost time. You're reading and suddenly realize you've read the same line 3 times without comprehension. You're in a meeting and notice people are looking at you expectantly, but you have no idea what was just said. You're having a conversation, and there's a gap, a moment you can't account for, and you have to reconstruct what must have happened from context clues. Aviation research has documented microsleeps in pilots during long flights, particularly during cruise phases when the task is monotonous and demands are low. The pilots aren't choosing to nod off. Their brains are staging brief mutinies, insisting on rest that the schedule doesn't permit. And while modern autopilot system can handle many routine tasks, there are critical moments when human attention is essential, when a microsleep of even 3 or 4 seconds could be catastrophic. The threshold between waking and sleeping, whether it's the dreamlike shimmer of hypnagogia or the blank dropout of microsleeps, reveals how fragile conscious awareness actually is. We think of consciousness as a stable state, something we're either in or out of, awake or asleep. But the reality is far more graduated, far more precarious. Consciousness is something your brain must actively maintain. And when resources run low, when adenosine climbs and neurons struggle to fire, that maintenance fails in predictable ways. The tired mind doesn't shut down cleanly. It stutters, flickers, transforms. And in those transformations, in that unstable territory between waking and dreaming, we catch glimpses of how constructed our normal awareness really is, how much work goes into maintaining the coherent, continuous sense of being present in the world. When that work becomes unsustainable, the coherence frays and we find ourselves in stranger territories, places where thought and perception follow rules we don't fully understand. Yet, even these strange territories are governed by processes we can study, patterns we can measure. And one of the most important patterns emerges when we look at what happens to memory itself in the tired brain, how exhaustion doesn't just make us forgetful in the moment, but actually disrupts the fundamental mechanisms by which experiences become lasting knowledge, by which the present becomes the past we can recall. Memory, when the brain grows tired, becomes like trying to write in sand while the tide comes in. You form the letters, press them into place, turn away for just a moment, and when you look back, the water has smoothed everything flat. The words were there. You're certain of it. But now there's only unmarked sand and the whisper of waves. This isn't metaphor. This is the measurable reality of how fatigue disrupts the intricate biological process by which fleeting experience becomes lasting memory. And the mechanisms underlying this disruption reveal something profound about consciousness itself, that remembering isn't a passive recording, but an active construction one that requires energy, attention, and above all, a brain operating within very specific chemical and electrical parameters. The architecture of memory formation involves a delicate relay race between different brain regions. When you experience something, see something, learn something, that information first arrives in your sensory cortices, the parts of your brain dedicated to processing sight, sound, touch. From there, it travels to the hippocampus, a seahorse-shaped structure deep in your temporal lobes that acts as a kind of memory encoding station. The hippocampus doesn't store memories permanently. Instead, it tags them, strengthens them, and gradually transfers them to the cortex for long-term storage, a process that can take days, weeks, or even months. But here's the critical detail: this entire system depends on a brain that has sufficient metabolic resources and properly functioning synaptic machinery. And fatigue undermines both. When you're exhausted when adenosine levels are high, and glucose availability in the prefrontal cortex is low, the hippocampus struggles to do its encoding work. It's like trying to save a document on a computer that's running out of battery. The save command might execute, but the file never actually writes to disk. The experience happens, but the memory doesn't form. Research by Matthew Walker and his colleagues at UC Berkeley has demonstrated this with uncomfortable precision. In studies where participants were kept awake for extended periods and then shown lists of words or images to memorize, those who were sleep-deprived showed encoding deficits of around 40% compared to well-rested controls. They weren't forgetting the information after learning it. They were failing to form robust memories in the first place. The hippocampus, compromised by fatigue, couldn't perform its essential function. Brain imaging during these experiments revealed why. When well-rested people try to memorize information, their hippocampi light up on fMRI scans showing vigorous activity. But in sleep-deprived participants, hippocampal activation is significantly diminished. The structure is there, the neurons are firing, but the overall pattern of activity is weaker, less organized, less capable of encoding information effectively. It's as if the encoder is working with a dying battery, producing a signal too faint to be reliably preserved. The problem compounds when you consider working memory the brain's scratch pad for holding information temporarily while you manipulate it. Working memory is what allows you to remember a phone number long enough to dial it, to follow the thread of a conversation, to solve a problem that requires keeping several pieces of information active simultaneously. And working memory is exquisitely vulnerable to fatigue. Studies show that after just 16 hours of continuous wakefulness, working memory capacity begins to decline measurably. By 24 hours without sleep, it's degraded by as much as 40%. You can still think, but you can't hold as many thoughts at once. You start a sentence and forget how you meant to end it. You walk into a room and can't remember why. You're introduced to someone and their name evaporates from your mind before the handshake ends. This happens because working memory depends heavily on the prefrontal cortex maintaining sustained patterns of neural firing. Specific groups of neurons need to stay active, keep firing in particular sequences to hold information online. But when those neurons are bathed in adenosine, when their glucose supply is depleted, when inhibitory neurotransmitters like GABA are elevated, they can't maintain those firing patterns reliably. The signal degrades, the information dissolves. There's a historical figure who documented his own experience with this degradation with remarkable clarity. Hermann Ebbinghaus, the German psychologist who in 1885 conducted some of the first systematic studies of memory. Ebbinghaus experimented on himself, memorizing lists of nonsense syllables and tracking how many he could recall after various delays. What he discovered graphed in his famous forgetting curve was that memory decays exponentially. We forget most of what we learn within the first hour, and the rate of forgetting slows after that. But Ebbinghaus also noticed something else. The forgetting curve steepened when he was fatigued. His ability to encode new information degraded noticeably when he was tired, and his ability to retrieve information he had previously learned also suffered. The tired mind wasn't just slower, it was leakier. Information slipped through gaps that didn't exist when he was rested. Modern neuroscience has identified some of those gaps. One involves a process called long-term potentiation, or LTP, which is the cellular mechanism underlying learning. When you learn something new, the synapses between neurons strengthen. The neurons become more likely to fire together in the future. This is the physical substrate of memory, the biological change that allows experience to leave a lasting trace. Donald Hebb, a neuropsychologist, famously summarized this as neurons that fire together wire together. But LTP requires very specific conditions. It needs certain neurotransmitters to be present in the right concentrations. It needs sufficient energy in the form of ATP. It needs the postsynaptic neuron to be in a receptive state, not overly inhibited or depleted. And fatigue disrupts all of these requirements. Studies in hippocampal slices taken from sleep-deprived animals show impaired LTP compared to well-rested controls. The cellular machinery of memory formation literally functions less effectively when the brain is tired. There's also the question of what happens during sleep itself, because memory consolidation. The process of transferring information from temporary to permanent storage happens primarily while we sleep. During deep sleep, the hippocampus replays the neural patterns that were active during waking experience, essentially rehearsing what was learned. And during this replay, the patterns are gradually transferred to the cortex, where they can be stored more permanently and integrated with existing knowledge. If you don't sleep, or if your sleep is disrupted or insufficient, this consolidation process falters. Studies have shown that people who learn a task and then stay awake show minimal improvement the next day. But people who learn the same task and then sleep show significant improvement even though they haven't practiced. The sleep itself strengthened the memory. The brain used the time offline to convert fragile, freshly encoded traces into stable, lasting knowledge. This explains something many students learn the hard way. Pulling an all-nighter before an exam is often counterproductive. You might cram more information into your head in the short term, but your brain won't consolidate it effectively. The fatigue impairs encoding, and the lack of sleep prevents consolidation. You end up in the exam room with a head full of information that feels slippery, hard to grasp, quick to evaporate under pressure. The knowledge is there, but you can't quite access it reliably. And there's an emotional dimension to this fragility. Research by Jessica Payne and colleagues has shown that sleep preferentially consolidates emotional memories over neutral ones. When you're well rested, your brain is particularly good at strengthening memories that have emotional significance, whether positive or negative. But when you're sleep deprived, this selectivity breaks down. You don't just forget neutral facts more readily. You also struggle to remember emotionally important experiences with the same clarity and detail. This has implications beyond just exam performance. It affects how we process our lives, how we integrate experiences into a coherent narrative of self. The tired brain doesn't just lose facts, it loses threads of personal history, moments that should matter, but slip away because the encoding and consolidation machinery was too compromised to preserve them. Have you noticed how days blur together when you're chronically underslept? How weeks can pass and you struggle to distinguish one from another? That's not just subjective malaise. That's your memory systems failing to tag and organize experiences distinctly. When every day is lived in a state of fatigue, when the hippocampus is always operating below capacity, experiences don't get encoded with sufficient detail and emotional coloring to stand out from each other. They all merge into an undifferentiated fog. There's a tragic irony in this. The times when we most need to remember clearly when we're under stress or working long hours or dealing with difficult situations are often precisely the times when we're most fatigued and our memory systems are most impaired. Medical residents working 30-hour shifts, soldiers in combat zones going days without adequate sleep, parents of newborns stumbling through sleep-deprived weeks, all are navigating high-stakes situations with memory systems that are functionally compromised. And the mistakes that result aren't just academic. A surgeon who forgets a step in a procedure, a parent who forgets they put something on the stove, a driver who forgets they're in a construction zone. These aren't moral failures or signs of incompetence. These are predictable outcomes of brains operating under conditions where memory formation and retrieval are neurologically impaired. The saddest part is how we internalize these failures. When your tired mind forgets something important, you blame yourself. You call yourself careless, unreliable, scatterbrained. But you're not any of those things. You're just a biological system trying to operate outside the parameters it was designed for. Your brain needs sleep to consolidate memories, needs rest to restore hippocampal function, needs downtime to transfer information from temporary to permanent storage. Without those conditions, forgetting isn't a flaw, it's inevitable. Scientists have even found that trying harder when you're fatigued can make things worse. When you're tired and you try to force yourself to concentrate, to remember to perform, you're recruiting additional neural resources to compensate for the impairment. But those resources are finite, and using them depletes other systems. It's like trying to sprint when you're already exhausted. You might make it a few more steps, but you're accelerating the crash that follows. Better research suggests to recognize the limitation and work with it rather than against it. If you need to learn something important, do it when you're rested. If you need to make a critical decision, don't do it at the end of a long day. If you've forgotten something, consider whether the forgetting is telling you something. Your schedule doesn't want to acknowledge that your brain needs rest more than it needs to keep pushing. The student who studies effectively for 45 minutes, then takes a brief nap, then studies again, will often outperform the student who powers through 3 hours straight. The break isn't laziness. It's allowing the brain time to begin the consolidation process to move information from working memory into more durable storage before trying to add more information on top. Memory isn't a vessel you fill. It's a process you support. And that support requires respecting the biological rhythms and limitations of the brain, doing the remembering. Yet, memory isn't the only faculty that deteriorates under the weight of exhaustion. There's another dimension to the tired mind, one that's perhaps even more immediately noticeable in daily life. The way fatigue transforms our emotional landscape, the way it doesn't just dull our thinking, but intensifies our feeling, particularly feelings we'd rather not have. And the mechanisms underlying this emotional amplification reveal how intricately connected cognition and emotion really are, how the same prefrontal systems that regulate attention also regulate how deeply we're affected by what we feel. The tired mind doesn't just think differently, it feels differently, more intensely, more darkly, more uncontrollably. A small frustration becomes rage. A minor worry swells into dread. A passing sadness deepens into something that feels like despair. And the question that haunts the exhausted person late at night is always the same. Are these feelings real, or are they just fatigue speaking? The answer neuroscience suggests is both. The feelings are real in the sense that you're genuinely experiencing them. The emotional circuits in your brain are genuinely activated. The neurochemicals associated with those emotions are genuinely flowing. But they're also distorted, amplified beyond what the situation warrants, because the regulatory systems that normally modulate emotional intensity have been compromised by exhaustion. At the center of this story sits a small almond-shaped structure deep in your temporal lobes called the amygdala. The amygdala is your brain's threat detector, its emotional alarm system. It responds to potential dangers, to social threats, to anything that might require a quick emotional reaction. When you see an angry face, a snake, a dark figure in an alley, your amygdala activates within milliseconds, triggering fear responses before your conscious mind has even identified what you're looking at. In a well-rested brain, the amygdala works in partnership with the prefrontal cortex. The amygdala sounds the alarm. The prefrontal cortex evaluates whether the alarm is warranted and, if necessary, dampens the response. You see the dark figure, the amygdala reacts. But then the prefrontal cortex recognizes it's just a trash can in shadows, and the fear subsides. This is emotional regulation, the constant back and forth between reactivity and restraint that allows you to respond appropriately rather than catastrophically to life's challenges. But fatigue disrupts this partnership in a specific and troubling way. Research by Seung-Shik Yu and Matthew Walker at UC Berkeley used fMRI scanning to watch what happens in sleep-deprived brains when shown emotional images. What they found was striking. Compared to well-rested participants, those who had been kept awake showed 60% greater amygdala activation in response to negative images. The emotional alarm was screaming louder, but at the same time, the functional connectivity between the amygdala and the prefrontal cortex was significantly weakened. The alarm was louder, and the dampening system was quieter. Think of it as having a smoke detector with a dying battery that makes it hypersensitive, going off at the slightest hint of smoke, combined with a fire suppression system that's lost pressure and can barely muster a trickle. You end up with maximum alarm and minimum control. Every small emotional provocation feels like an emergency, and you have diminished capacity to talk yourself down from that feeling. This explains something that ruins relationships, damages careers, and haunts people in their most exhausted moments. Why arguments at night are so much worse than arguments in the morning. When you're tired and someone criticizes you, questions you, or simply disagrees with you, your amygdala interprets it as a more severe threat than it actually is. Your emotional reaction is disproportionate. And because your prefrontal cortex can't properly regulate that reaction, you say things you don't mean, escalate conflicts. You could have diffused damaged connections you value. Couples therapists have long known this pattern. Many recommend that serious discussions not happen late at night, when both parties are exhausted and emotional regulation is compromised. It's not about avoiding difficult conversations. It's about having them when your brain is capable of processing emotion and reason simultaneously, rather than being flooded by one at the expense of the other. The amplification doesn't only apply to anger or fear. Studies have shown that sleep deprivation also intensifies responses to sad stimuli, increasing activity in brain regions associated with depression. It makes neutral faces look more threatening. It makes ambiguous social cues seem more negative. The tired brain develops a negativity bias, interpreting the world through a darker lens than the rested brain would. There's a neurochemical component to this shift. When you're sleep deprived, your stress hormone cortisol doesn't follow its normal daily rhythm. Typically, cortisol peaks in the early morning to help you wake up, and then gradually declines throughout the day. But chronic sleep restriction flattens this curve and keeps cortisol elevated into the evening when it should be low. Elevated cortisol enhances amygdala reactivity and impairs prefrontal function, creating a neurochemical environment primed for emotional overreaction. At the same time, serotonin, a neurotransmitter involved in mood regulation and emotional stability, becomes dysregulated with sleep loss. Lower serotonin is associated with increased anxiety, irritability, and difficulty controlling impulses. The tired brain is biochemically set up to feel worse and cope less effectively with those feelings. There's a particularly insidious form this takes in the rumination that often accompanies late-night exhaustion. Rumination is the tendency to repetitively think about negative events, to replay them mentally, analyzing what went wrong, imagining what could have been done differently, spiraling deeper into self-criticism or worry. It's thinking that doesn't solve problems, but rather loops endlessly around them, wearing grooves in the mind, like water cutting channels in stone. Susan Nolan Hoeksema, a psychologist who spent decades studying rumination, found that it's one of the strongest predictors of depression and anxiety. And research shows that sleep deprivation significantly increases ruminative thinking. The tired mind doesn't just visit negative thoughts, it gets stuck in them, circling the same worries over and over without resolution. Why does fatigue promote rumination? Part of it is that weakened prefrontal control we keep returning to. The prefrontal cortex normally helps you shift attention, to recognize when a line of thinking isn't productive and deliberately move to something else. But when that control weakens, you lose the ability to break the loop. Your mind returns to the same thoughts compulsively, not because the thoughts are particularly important or insightful, but because you've lost the executive function needed to redirect attention elsewhere. There's also evidence that sleep deprivation affects the brain's reward systems, reducing activity in regions that respond to positive experiences. A study by Gujar and colleagues found that sleep-deprived participants showed blunted responses in the striatum, a key reward center when shown pleasant images. The world literally feels less rewarding when you're tired. Things that would normally bring pleasure, a beautiful sunset, a friend's joke, a good meal register with less intensity. You're not losing the capacity for joy because you're depressed. You're experiencing reduced reward sensitivity because your brain is exhausted. This creates a vicious cycle. When you're tired, negative emotions feel more intense, and positive emotions feel more muted. You're more likely to notice what's wrong and less likely to notice what's right. This biased perception then feeds rumination, which increases stress, which further impairs sleep, which deepens the emotional dysregulation. It spirals. And perhaps most troubling is how this affects social interactions. Research by Talma Hendler and colleagues in Israel showed that sleep-deprived people are significantly worse at reading facial expressions, particularly subtle ones. They're more likely to misinterpret neutral expressions as angry or sad. They're less accurate at detecting genuine emotions in others. This matters because so much of human connection depends on accurately perceiving and responding to emotional cues. When fatigue impairs that ability, you're more likely to misread a friend's mood, misjudge a colleague's intentions, or respond inappropriately to a partner's needs. Imagine navigating your social world with the emotional sensitivity turned up too high for your own feelings and turned down too low for everyone else's. You're overreacting to slights that weren't intended while missing genuine distress in the people around you. You're emotionally dysregulated and socially clumsy, and you probably blame yourself for both without recognizing that both are consequences of the same neurological impairment. There's a historical echo here worth noting. Before the modern understanding of sleep's role in emotional regulation, many cultures recognized nighttime as a dangerous time for decision-making. The phrase "sleep on it" exists in various forms across languages, a cultural wisdom that important choices should be deferred until morning when the mind is clear. What seemed like folk wisdom turns out to be neurologically sound advice. The night-tired mind is genuinely less capable of weighing options rationally, of separating feeling from fact. And yet modern life increasingly demands that we make important decisions, manage complex emotions, navigate sensitive relationships, all while chronically underslept. The average adult now sleeps about 6.5 hours per night, far less than the 7 to 9 hours most people need for optimal function. We're conducting our emotional lives with impaired equipment, and we wonder why everything feels harder than it should. The mistake we make is treating emotional intensity as information rather than recognizing it as symptom. When the late-night anxiety tells you your life is falling apart, when the 3 a.m. shame tells you you're inadequate, when the exhausted anger tells you someone has wronged you. Unforgivably, these feelings seem like they're revealing truth. They feel true. But what they're actually revealing is the state of your amygdala prefrontal balance, your cortisol levels, your degree of sleep debt. They're data about your brain's functioning, not necessarily about your life's actual circumstances. This isn't to say tired emotions are invalid or should be dismissed. Pain is pain even when it's amplified by fatigue. Hurt is hurt. Fear is fear. But understanding the amplification allows you to hold the emotions differently, to say, I'm feeling this intensely, partly because I'm exhausted rather than this feeling is an accurate reflection of reality. That distinction creates space, a small buffer, between the feeling and the reaction. And in that space, better choices become possible. One of the most compassionate things you can do for yourself when you're tired is to recognize that your emotional landscape has shifted, that feelings that seem overwhelming might be more manageable after rest, that decisions that feel urgent might look different in the morning. It's not suppressing emotion. It's acknowledging that the instrument you're using to measure emotional reality is currently miscalibrated and might benefit from recalibration through sleep. But the tired mind's alterations extend beyond even memory and emotion into something stranger and more fundamental, the very nature of how thoughts connect to each other, how ideas flow and associate, how consciousness itself wanders through the territories of knowledge and imagination. And when we examine that wandering closely, when we look at where the tired mind goes when it's released from the constraints of focused attention, we find patterns that are both deeply personal and remarkably universal. When you let go of focus, when you stop trying to direct your thoughts toward any particular destination, where does your mind actually go? The answer research reveals is both remarkably predictable and deeply personal. The tired brain doesn't wander randomly. It wanders along well-worn paths, visiting certain territories again and again, as if consciousness has favorite routes it takes when released from the demands of the present moment. Jonathan Smallwood, a cognitive neuroscientist whose work spans universities from York to Queens, has spent years mapping the landscape of mind wandering. What he's found challenges the assumption that letting your mind drift is simply a waste of time or a failure of concentration. Instead, mind wandering appears to serve specific psychological functions. It allows you to plan for the future, to reflect on the past, to process unresolved emotions, to maintain your sense of identity across time. The wandering mind is working just not on the task at hand. But here's what makes this relevant to fatigue when your brain is tired. Mind wandering doesn't just increase in frequency, it changes in character. Studies using experience sampling, where participants are randomly prompted throughout the day to report what they're thinking about, show that sleep-deprived individuals engage in significantly more mind-wandering than well-rested ones. But the content of that wandering tilts negative. Tired minds are more likely to ruminate on problems, to replay social failures, to anticipate future difficulties. The architecture underlying this is the default mode network we discussed earlier, that constellation of brain regions that activates when you're not focused on external tasks. The default mode network includes the medial prefrontal cortex, which is involved in self-referential thinking, the posterior cingulate cortex, which helps retrieve autobiographical memories, and the temporal poles, which integrate emotional and semantic knowledge. Together, these regions create what neuroscientists call the narrative self, the ongoing story you tell yourself about who you are. When you're well rested and your mind wanders, the default mode network generates a relatively balanced mix of past-focused, present-focused, and future-focused thoughts. You might remember a pleasant conversation from last week. Notice the sound of rain outside, then imagine what you'll cook for dinner. The wandering has a certain fluidity, moving between time periods without getting stuck. But when you're fatigued, something shifts. Research by Jessica Andrews Hanna at the University of Arizona has shown that sleep deprivation increases connectivity within the default mode network, while simultaneously reducing the prefrontal cortex's ability to regulate it. The result is a network that's hyperactive and poorly controlled, generating more thoughts but with less ability to redirect when those thoughts become unproductive. And the thoughts it generates tend toward what psychologists call temporal discounting gone wrong. Your tired mind becomes preoccupied with past mistakes and future worries at the expense of present awareness. You're sitting in a meeting, but mentally replaying an argument from yesterday. You're having dinner with friends, but anxiously rehearsing a presentation scheduled for next week. The present moment where life is actually happening becomes a thin slice of awareness between the weight of memory and the pull of anticipation. There's a quality to fatigued mind wandering that anyone who's experienced it will recognize. The thoughts don't just drift, they spiral. You start thinking about one small worry, and within minutes, you've constructed an elaborate catastrophe. A minor financial concern becomes bankruptcy. A small health symptom becomes terminal illness. A colleague's neutral comment becomes evidence of professional failure. The tired mind takes a single thread and weaves it into an entire tapestry of doom. This spiraling happens because the tired default mode network operates without adequate regulatory input from the prefrontal cortex. Normally, when your mind starts catastrophizing, the prefrontal cortex steps in with reality checks. Is this thought helpful? Is it accurate? Is there evidence for this conclusion? But when that supervisory system is weakened by fatigue, the catastrophic thoughts go unchallenged. They build on each other, each speculation treated as fact, each fear amplified by the one before it. Neuroscientist Marcus Rachel, whose lab first identified the default mode network, has described it as the brain's sentinel system, constantly monitoring the internal and external environment for potential threats or opportunities. This makes evolutionary sense. An organism that could reflect on past experiences and anticipate future challenges would have survival advantages. But, like any alarm system, it can malfunction. And fatigue appears to set it to hypersensitive detecting threats everywhere. The temporal signature of fatigued mind wandering is particularly interesting. When researchers track where people's minds go throughout the day, they find that well-rested individuals show a roughly even distribution of past, present, and future thinking. But sleep-deprived individuals show a pronounced bias toward future thinking, and specifically toward anxious future thinking. They're not daydreaming about wonderful possibilities. They're catastrophizing about terrible ones. Why would the tired brain become preoccupied with negative futures? Some researchers suggest it's related to uncertainty and reduced cognitive resources. When you're exhausted, you feel less capable of handling challenges, and that feeling of reduced capacity makes potential future difficulties seem more threatening. You're not just imagining a difficult conversation, you're imagining it while feeling incapable of handling it well. The future becomes scarier because you feel less equipped to meet it. There's also the phenomenon of what's called sticky thinking, where the tired mind has difficulty shifting between different trains of thought. You might start thinking about work, then try to shift to something more pleasant, but your thoughts keep drifting back to work. You want to stop ruminating on a problem, but it's as if your mind has a gravitational pull toward that problem. This stickiness is thought to reflect reduced cognitive flexibility, another prefrontal function that degrades under fatigue. Studies using brain imaging have shown that when people are asked to deliberately shift their attention from one topic to another, sleep-deprived individuals show reduced activation in prefrontal regions associated with cognitive control and increased activation in the default mode network. They're trying to redirect their thoughts, but the wandering system is too strong and the control system is too weak. The thoughts win. And here's something particularly worth noting. Not all mind wandering is problematic. There's a distinction researchers make between what they call constructive versus unconstructive mind wandering. Constructive wandering involves creative thinking, planning, problem solving, meaning making. It's the mind exploring possibilities, making connections, generating insights. Unconstructive wandering is rumination, worry, aimless repetitive thought that doesn't lead anywhere productive. Well-rested people engage in more constructive mind wandering. Their mental drift includes creative ideas, pleasant memories, productive planning. Fatigued people engage in more unconstructive mind wandering. Their drift is dominated by worry loops, regret spirals, and anxious scenarios. Same neural network, different quality of output. And the difference comes down to how well the prefrontal cortex can guide and modulate that network's activity. There's a beautiful irony in this. The default mode network, when properly regulated, is associated with some of humanity's highest capacities. Autobiographical memory, the sense of continuous identity across time, theory of mind, or the ability to imagine others' perspectives, moral reasoning, creative insight. These are the cognitive functions that make us distinctly human. But when that same network operates without adequate regulation, when fatigue removes the guiding hand of prefrontal control, those same capacities become sources of suffering. Memory becomes rumination. Identity becomes self-criticism. Theory of mind becomes social anxiety. Creativity becomes catastrophic imagination. Have you ever noticed that some of your best ideas come during a shower, a walk, a drive, moments when you're relaxed but not actively trying to solve a problem? That's constructive mind wandering in the default mode network, making connections between disparate pieces of information, finding patterns that focused attention might miss. But that same shower, that same walk when you're exhausted, can become a trap of circular worry where your mind visits the same anxious thoughts over and over without insight or resolution. The difference isn't in the activity itself, but in the state of your brain while engaging in it. A rested brain can wander productively. A tired brain wanders destructively. The wandering itself is neutral. The quality depends on the neurological conditions under which it occurs. This has practical implications. There's a common belief that if you're struggling with a problem, you should just power through, keep working at it until you solve it. But research on incubation effects suggests the opposite. Often the best thing you can do with a difficult problem is stop working on it consciously and let your default mode network work on it unconsciously. But, and this is crucial, that unconscious processing works best when you're rested. The tired mind doesn't incubate solutions. It incubates anxiety. Studies of creative professionals, scientists, writers, artists consistently show that their best work emerges not from grinding through fatigue, but from alternating between focused effort and rested relaxation. The focused work provides the raw material, the information, and challenges. The rested relaxation allows the default mode network to process that material, creatively making unexpected connections, generating novel solutions. But if the relaxation isn't truly restful, if it's occurring in a state of exhaustion, the network generates rumination instead of insight. There's also the question of what happens to the sense of self during fatigued mind wandering. Your narrative identity, the story of who you are, is constantly being constructed and reconstructed by your default mode network. It weaves together memories, current experiences, future plans, and values into a coherent sense of self across time. But when that network is hyperactive and poorly regulated, when it's generating primarily negative content, the story it tells becomes darker, more critical, more hopeless. People who are chronically sleep-deprived often report feeling like, they've lost touch with themselves, like they don't recognize the person they've become. That's not metaphorical. It's their default mode network, literally constructing a different narrative identity. one that emphasizes failures, limitations, and negative possibilities at the expense of strengths, achievements, and positive potential. The self you believe yourself to be shifts depending on the neurological conditions under which that belief is being constructed. And this brings us to a profound and somewhat unsettling realization: the thoughts that arise during mind wandering, particularly fatigued mind wandering, feel like they're revealing something true about reality or about yourself. They feel like insights, like you're finally seeing clearly, but they're not insights. They're artifacts of a particular pattern of neural activity occurring under suboptimal conditions. They're no more revealing truth than static on a radio reveals the message trying to come through. The challenge is that you can't simply dismiss the thoughts as meaningless. They carry emotional weight. They feel important. And in some sense, they are important, not because they're accurate, but because they're affecting you. The question becomes how to relate to them differently, how to recognize them as products of a tired brain, rather than as prophetic visions of your life's actual trajectory. But the tired brain doesn't only alter where your thoughts go and how they feel, it also changes something even more fundamental, something that happens so constantly. You rarely notice it: the way your body communicates with your mind, the physical sensations that ground consciousness in flesh and bone, the signals that tell you moment by moment that you exist, that you're here, that you're alive and embodied in this particular place and time. Your body knows you're tired long before your mind admits it. The heaviness in your eyelids, the ache settling into your shoulders, the way your jaw keeps falling slack. These aren't random physical complaints. They're part of an elegant signaling system, a conversation between body and brain that's been running continuously since you woke this morning, growing more insistent with each passing hour. This conversation operates through two overlapping systems that neuroscientists call Process C and Process S. Process C is your circadian rhythm, your internal biological clock that runs on a roughly 24-hour cycle regardless of whether you're awake or asleep. It's governed primarily by a tiny cluster of neurons in your hypothalamus called the suprachiasmatic nucleus, which receives input directly from light-sensitive cells in your retinas. When daylight hits those cells, your circadian system knows it's time to be alert. When darkness falls, it knows it's time to prepare for sleep. Process S is sleep pressure, the accumulating drive for sleep that builds with every hour of wakefulness. This is where adenosine, that molecule we discussed earlier, plays its crucial role. The longer you're awake, the more adenosine accumulates and the stronger the pressure to sleep becomes. These two processes, circadian and homeostatic, work together to determine when you feel alert and when you feel exhausted. But here's what makes this fascinating. These internal processes manifest in your body in ways you can observe and measure. Your core body temperature, for instance, follows a circadian pattern, rising through the morning and afternoon, peaking in early evening, then declining toward its lowest point around 4 or 5 a.m. As your temperature drops, you feel sleepier. The body is literally cooling itself down in preparation for sleep. Because sleep itself requires a slightly lower core temperature to initiate and maintain. This is why a hot bath before bed can actually help you sleep. It seems counterintuitive warming up to cool down, but when you immerse yourself in hot water, your body responds by dilating blood vessels near the skin to release heat. When you get out of the bath, that heat continues radiating away, and your core temperature drops more rapidly than it would have otherwise. The warm bath tricks your body into accelerating its natural cooling process. And then there's yawning, that universal signal of tiredness that transcends species. Humans yawn, dogs yawn, birds yawn, even fish yawn. But why? The traditional explanation that yawning brings more oxygen to the brain has been largely discredited. Brain imaging studies show no significant change in blood oxygen levels before or after a yawn. So, what's actually happening? One compelling hypothesis proposed by Andrew Gallup at the State University of New York is that yawning functions as a brain cooling mechanism. When you yawn, You draw cool air into your nasal and oral cavities, and the stretching of your jaw increases blood flow to your brain. This combination may help lower brain temperature slightly. And why would a tired brain need cooling? Because prolonged mental activity generates heat. Your neurons firing constantly throughout the day produce thermal energy. Yawning might be your brain's attempt to regulate its temperature when it's been running hot for too long. Supporting this theory is the observation that yawning increases in frequency during the transition from wakefulness to sleep, precisely when brain temperature begins its circadian decline. It also increases in boring or monotonous situations, which studies suggest raises brain temperature due to reduced stimulation and blood flow. The yawn might be your brain saying, "I'm overheating from lack of engagement," or "I'm overheating from too many hours awake." But yawning also has a social dimension. It's famously contagious. You see someone yawn, and within moments you're yawning too. This contagion appears to be linked to empathy and social bonding. Studies show that you're more likely to catch a yawn from someone you know and care about than from a stranger. The neural mechanisms involve mirror neurons, brain cells that fire both when you perform an action and when you watch someone else perform it. Yawning contagion might be a form of unconscious emotional synchrony, a way that groups coordinate their states of alertness or readiness for rest. Then there are your eyelids, those thin curtains of skin that suddenly feel heavy as lead when fatigue sets in. Why do tired eyelids feel the way they do? The muscle responsible for keeping your eyelids open, the levator palpebrae superioris, is under voluntary control, but it also receives input from arousal systems in your brainstem. When those arousal systems are functioning well, keeping your eyes open requires minimal effort. But as adenosine accumulates and arousal systems weaken, maintaining that muscle contraction becomes effortful. Your eyelids don't just want to close. They're being actively pulled closed by the declining arousal signals from your exhausted brainstem. And the blinks change too. Normal blink rate is about 15 to 20 times per minute. But when you're fatigued, you blink more frequently, and each blink lasts longer. Studies of drowsy drivers show their blink duration increases significantly in the minutes before they nod off or experience a micro-sleep. It's as if each blink is a tiny rehearsal for sleep, the eyelids staying closed a fraction of a second longer than they need to, testing whether this might be the moment consciousness finally lets go. There's also the phenomenon of brain fog, that subjective sense of mental cloudiness that makes thinking feel like wading through thick liquid. For years, this was dismissed as purely psychological, but research has identified physiological correlates. When you're sleep-deprived, glucose metabolism in your prefrontal cortex decreases significantly. PET scans show reduced glucose uptake, meaning the neurons aren't getting as much fuel as they need. The fog you feel is literally an energy deficit in the part of your brain responsible for clear thinking. At the same time, inflammatory markers increase throughout the brain with sleep deprivation. Cytokines, molecules associated with immune response and inflammation, rise in the cerebrospinal fluid. Some researchers believe this inflammatory state contributes to the subjective sense of cognitive impairment. Your brain isn't just running low on fuel, it's also experiencing a mild inflammatory response to the stress of prolonged wakefulness. And your reaction times slow measurably. Studies of fatigued individuals show that simple reaction time, the speed at which you can respond to a stimulus, degrades by about 10 to 20% after a full day awake. But choice reaction time, where you have to decide between multiple possible responses, degrades much more, sometimes by 40 to 50%. The tired brain can still react, but it struggles to decide quickly and accurately. This has been documented extensively in aviation research. In the 1990s, NASA conducted studies of commercial pilots during long-haul flights, monitoring their reaction times and decision-making capabilities. What they found was sobering. Pilots who'd been awake for extended periods showed reaction times comparable to legally intoxicated individuals. In critical moments, fractions of a second matter. A delayed response can mean the difference between avoiding a collision and experiencing one. The U.S. National Transportation Safety Board has investigated multiple accidents where pilot fatigue was a contributing factor. In some cases, tired pilots failed to respond to warnings, missed crucial communications, or made decisions that well-rested pilots would never have made. These weren't incompetent people. They were skilled professionals operating with brains that had been awake too long, brains that could no longer process information and execute responses at the speed safety required. But the body's signals of tiredness aren't always obvious or dramatic. Sometimes they're subtle, a slight chill even though the room temperature hasn't changed, a vague sense of physical discomfort that's hard to localize, an increased sensitivity to minor aches and pains. These two are part of how the fatigued brain communicates through the body. Research on pain perception has shown that sleep deprivation lowers pain threshold. Stimuli that wouldn't bother you when well-rested become uncomfortable when you're tired. This happens because fatigue alters activity in brain regions involved in pain processing, making you more sensitive to nociceptive signals. The pain isn't imaginary. Your nervous system is genuinely processing sensory information differently. And there's hunger, or sometimes the opposite loss of appetite. Sleep deprivation disrupts the hormones that regulate hunger and satiety. Ghrelin, which stimulates appetite, increases. Leptin, which signals fullness, decreases. You end up feeling hungrier than your actual caloric needs justify, and you crave simple carbohydrates and sugars because your brain is trying to quickly replenish its depleted glucose stores. The late-night snacking, the irresistible pull towards sweets when you're exhausted, these aren't failures of willpower. They're your endocrine system responding to perceived energy deficit. Some people experience what's called paradoxical insomnia when they're overtired. They're exhausted, desperately want to sleep. But when they lie down, their mind races and their body feels wired. This seems contradictory, but it reflects the complex interaction between sleep pressure and arousal. When you push through fatigue for too long, your body sometimes responds by releasing stress hormones, cortisol, and adrenaline to keep you functional. These hormones can persist even after you finally try to rest, creating a state where you're simultaneously exhausted and unable to sleep. Think about your own body right now. Can you feel the subtle weight in your limbs, the way your breathing has perhaps slowed and deepened, the slight heaviness behind your eyes? These aren't signs of illness or weakness. They're your body's wisdom, its ancient knowledge of when consciousness needs to yield to rest. The circadian system that governs all of this has been evolving for billions of years. Even single-celled organisms have circadian rhythms, internal clocks, that help them anticipate daily changes in their environment. In humans, these rhythms coordinate not just sleep and wakefulness, but hundreds of physiological processes: hormone secretion, immune function, cell division, metabolism. When you fight against your circadian rhythm, when you force yourself to stay alert, when your biology says it's time to rest, you're not just making yourself tired. You're disrupting a deeply integrated system that affects your entire organism. Jeffrey Hall, Michael Rosbash, and Michael Young won the Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine in 2017 for their discoveries of molecular mechanisms controlling circadian rhythm. They identified the genes and proteins that create the approximately 24-hour cycle, showing how life itself is structured around the rotation of Earth, around the alternation of light and dark. Your tiredness at the end of the day isn't arbitrary. It's written into your genome, expressed through proteins that accumulate and degrade in precise cycles. And yet, modern life asks us to override these ancient rhythms constantly. Shift work, red-eye flights, all-night study sessions, streaming services that make it effortless to watch just one more episode at 2 a.m. We've created a world that operates 24/7 while living in bodies that still run on the same biological clock our ancestors had. The clock that says, when the sun goes down, it's time to rest. The cost of this mismatch shows up in your body's signals. In the yawns you suppress, the heavy eyelids you force open the brain fog, You try to push through with another cup of coffee. Your body is trying to tell you something. The question is whether you're willing to listen, whether you can recognize these physical sensations, not as inconveniences to overcome, but as information to respect. Because the story of the tired brain isn't complete until we understand. It's not just a brain story, it's a whole body story, a conversation between neural systems and muscular systems and endocrine systems and immune systems. And all of these systems, when functioning well, when given the rest, they need work together to create something that might seem simple but is actually remarkably complex. The clear, alert, resilient consciousness that allows you to engage fully with your life and the lives of those around you. So here we are at the end of this quiet journey through the science of the tired mind. We've traveled through neural networks and neurotransmitters, through the chemistry of exhaustion and the physics of consciousness. We've watched as adenosine accumulates like snow on branches, as the prefrontal cortex loses its grip, as the default mode network takes over, and thoughts begin their inevitable drift toward memory, toward worry, toward the strange borderlands between waking and sleep. And what have we learned? That the wandering mind isn't a failure, it's a feature. That fatigue doesn't break the brain, it transforms, it shifts it into different modes of operation, with different strengths and different vulnerabilities. That the thoughts that feel so urgent and true at midnight might simply be the predictable output of a particular neurochemical state, no more prophetic than static on a radio. But perhaps the deepest lesson is this: your brain is not a machine that should run continuously. It's a biological organ with rhythms, with needs, with limits that deserve respect rather than resistance. Every signal of tiredness, every yawn, every heavy eyelid, every wandering thought is your body trying to guide you towards something essential. Not as punishment or weakness, but as wisdom, older than language, older than thought itself. Think about what we've discovered, the prefrontal cortex, that remarkable structure that makes us capable of planning, reasoning, self-control, degrades faster under fatigue than almost any other brain region. It's metabolically expensive, evolutionarily recent, exquisitely sensitive to depletion. When it weakens, we don't lose consciousness. We lose the ability to direct consciousness effectively. The lights stay on, but no one's steering the ship. Meanwhile, older structures persist. The amygdala keeps sounding alarms often too loud. The default mode network keeps generating thoughts often too negative. The hippocampus struggles to encode new memories while old ones surface unbidden. You end up in that peculiar state we've all experienced, awake enough to think, but too impaired to think well, alert enough to feel, but too dysregulated to feel accurately. And the cost of this state isn't trivial. We've seen how it increases accident risk, impairs medical judgment, damages relationships, distorts emotional reality. We've seen how it makes the world seem darker than it is, problems seem larger than they are, futures seem bleaker than they might be. The tired brain doesn't reveal hidden truths. It amplifies certain frequencies, dampens others, and presents you with a distorted version of reality that feels more accurate than it actually is. But here's what's remarkable. All of this is reversible. Sleep real, sleep sufficient. Sleep restores the balance. It clears the adenosine, replenishes the glucose, allows the prefrontal cortex to regain its regulatory strength. It gives the hippocampus time to consolidate memories, the amygdala time to recalibrate its sensitivity, the whole system time to reset itself. You wake up and the world hasn't changed, but your capacity to meet it has been renewed. The research on sleep's restorative effects is unambiguous. Matthew Walker's work at UC Berkeley has shown that even a single night of adequate sleep can restore cognitive function, emotional regulation, and memory formation to baseline levels. The deficits that accumulate across a day of wakefulness aren't permanent damage. They're temporary states that sleep reliably reverses. The tired brain is struggling, but it's not broken. And yet, we live in a culture that treats sleep as optional, as something to be minimized in service of productivity. The average adult now sleeps less than 7 hours per night, and nearly a third regularly get less than 6. We're conducting an unprecedented experiment in chronic sleep restriction, and the data suggests it's not going well. Rates of anxiety, depression and metabolic disease, and cognitive decline are all correlated with insufficient sleep. We're paying for those extra hours of wakefulness with our health, our relationships, our quality of life. There's a profound irony here. We sacrifice sleep to get more done, but the tired brain is less efficient, less creative, less capable of quality work. We stay up late trying to solve problems that often look simpler after a good night's rest. We push through fatigue, thinking we're being disciplined, when really we're just making everything harder than it needs to be. What if we treated tiredness differently? Not as an enemy to overcome, but as information to integrate. What if when your thoughts start to drift, when focus becomes effortful, when emotions feel overwhelming, you recognize these not as personal failings, but as signals that your brain needs rest? What would change if you gave yourself permission to stop, to rest, to sleep when your body asks for it? This isn't about being lazy or weak, it's about being wise. The most productive, creative, resilient people aren't those who sleep the least. They're those who understand that rest and work are partners, not competitors. That the brain offline sleeping dreaming is doing work the waking brain cannot do. That consciousness needs to withdraw periodically into unconsciousness to renew itself. The scientists who discovered the circadian system, who mapped the default mode network, who identified adenosine's role in sleep pressure, they gave us a gift. The knowledge that our tiredness isn't arbitrary, isn't weakness, isn't something to be ashamed of or fought against. It's the expression of ancient biological processes that have kept organisms alive and thriving for millions of years. And when you understand those processes, when you see the elegant machinery underlying the tired mind's drift, you can hold your experience differently. The anxious thoughts at midnight, that's a hyperactive amygdala and a depleted prefrontal cortex, not a prophecy. The forgotten conversation, that's impaired hippocampal encoding, not early dementia. The overwhelming emotion, that's neurochemistry, not character flaw. This understanding doesn't make the experiences less real or less difficult. Pain is still pain. Confusion is still confusion. But it changes the story you tell yourself about those experiences. It creates space between the sensation and the interpretation. And in that space, compassion becomes possible. You can be kind to yourself in your tiredness rather than critical. You can recognize when rest is what you need most, even when it's not what your schedule permits. Have you been tired today? This week? Longer? Have you pushed through exhaustion, thinking you had no choice, that rest was a luxury you couldn't afford? What if rest isn't a luxury but a necessity as fundamental as food or water? What if your wandering thoughts, your emotional intensity, your forgetfulness are all just your body's way of saying, I need you to stop, I need you to sleep? The drift of thoughts as the brain grows tired isn't a bug in human consciousness. It's a transition, a gradual letting go of voluntary control as involuntary systems prepare to take over. The wandering is the pathway, the fatigue is the invitation. And sleep, when you finally allow it, is the destination your brain has been navigating toward all along. We've spent these hours together, exploring the neuroscience of exhaustion, but the wisdom underneath that, science is simple, and ancient rest is not weakness, it's renewal. The tired mind isn't broken, it's asking for what it needs. And when you give it what it needs, when you honor the signals your body sends, when you let the drift carry you into sleep, rather than fighting it, you're not giving up. You're participating in one of life's most fundamental rhythms, the rhythm of activity and rest, of waking and sleeping, of holding on and letting go. So, perhaps tonight or whenever exhaustion next finds you, you might remember this. Remember that your wandering thoughts are neurons struggling with adenosine, that your emotional intensity is an amygdala without adequate prefrontal regulation, that your forgetfulness is a hippocampus trying to encode with insufficient resources. Remember that these are temporary states, not permanent truths. And remember that simple sleep, can restore what fatigue has depleted. The brain gets tired so that it can rest. Thoughts begin to drift so that consciousness can release its grip. The body signals exhaustion so that you'll listen, so that you'll stop, so that you'll give yourself what every organism needs: the chance to withdraw, to restore, to prepare for another day of being awake and alive and engaged with the world. We've walked through a lot of science together, through neurotransmitters and networks and rhythms and signals. But it all points towards something beautifully simple. You don't need to understand the mechanisms to respect the message. When you're tired, rest. When your thoughts drift, let them. When your body says it's time to sleep, trust that it knows what it's talking about. Thank you for drifting through this exploration with me. Thank you for staying curious about the science of your own experience, for being willing to understand rather than simply endure your fatigue. The tired brain is a fascinating territory full of strange transformations and unexpected wisdom. And now, having mapped some of that territory together, perhaps you can navigate it with a little more gentleness, a little more understanding, a little more respect for the signals your consciousness sends when it needs to let go. There are more quiet journeys ahead, more mysteries of mind and body to explore together. But for now, this one has reached its natural end. Sleep well, friend. Dream gently. Let your thoughts drift wherever they need to go. And when you wake, may you wake restored, renewed, ready to meet the world with a brain that's had the rest it asked for. Good night.